Hi, I'm Robbin Miller, co-host of Millerchat. My co-host today is Doris Livesay. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
We are pleased to have two guests on our show. We have Ellen Chambers, founder and past president of SPEDWatch, and we have the current president, Dr. Gary Vinch. Welcome. Thank you for coming out today on this beautiful day in April.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
All right, Doris, let's go.
Okay. What is SPEDWatch and what does it do?
What is SPEDWatch? SPEDWatch is a nonprofit organization that was founded to confront the high rate of noncompliance with special education law that occurs in our public schools and the human consequences of that noncompliance. So we are organizing a grassroots social change, civil rights movement for children's special education rights. Most people do not realize that although we have special education laws on the books, and have for many, many years, those laws are routinely violated. Students with special needs in Massachusetts are routinely denied the educational services that they need in order to learn. And they are failing in very high numbers because of it. But there hasn't been an organization that pulled parents together quite the way we're doing it. It's very much a grassroots initiative, and we are working on what we would consider the root causes of the problem. And so we've been in existence since 2006. We incorporated in 2006, so we've been operating for several years. We had certainly a number of successes, and continue to build our membership and continue to confront school districts and the government with this very egregious situation.
Oh, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think we provide also a good amount of support to parents who who may not have resources to turn to advocates. Here they can turn to quite experienced parents. One, for the comfort of just knowing that they're not alone, that there are other children with issues, there are other families going through similar things, and there's a great body of experience and advice out there available to them if they tap into our network.
And do you have any questions? And how is SPEDWatch different from like the Federation for Children with Special Needs, the Disability Law Center? And may I say, what is that?
Mass Advocates for Children.
Oh, okay.
The Federation for Children with Special Needs is the federally mandated, it's called a Parent Training and Information Center. Every state has one to support families of children who have special needs. Disability Law Center and the Mass Advocates for Children, they are both public interest law firms that work in the area of disability. Disability Law Center handles everything from employment, housing, education for all ages. And Massachusetts Advocates for Children are focused primarily on children and very heavily on education. So they are out there doing advocacy work as well. What makes us different fundamentally, I believe, is this. The Federation, Disability Law Center, Mass Advocates for Children, they're doing wonderful work. They're out there training parents, talking to legislators and so forth, and providing phone support to parents. However, it was my feeling as the founder that all of that, although it's very necessary, absolutely necessary, it doesn't really get at the cause of the problem. And we wanted to create an organization that would, simply put, cure the disease rather than just treating the symptoms, and that's not to be disparaging to these other organizations because they're doing fabulous work. They're doing work that SPEDWatch doesn't necessarily want to do or isn't well equipped to do, but we've always felt training advocacy, that type of thing, is very much treating the symptom. We're looking at this very much as a societal issue and looking to change the hearts and the minds of society such that the notion that you would deny a student with a disability an education, that one day that will be as abhorrent a thought as today we would say, you know, if we denied a child an education because they were black, we would find that absolutely unacceptable. But there wasn't a time too long ago when that was fine. That was just part of our culture. It didn't make anybody bad people.
No.
It's just that was part of the culture. We want to move children with special needs in that direction as well, so that there will come a time when we would never think of denying a child with a disability a proper education. Unfortunately, we're a long way from there. It's something that's done every day and certainly sanctioned by our government by their inaction.
Unfortunately, it's a common perception that children with learning disabilities have somewhat of a lower potential to learn, and that's quite in fact not the case. They have a very good potential of learning. They learn differently, and given the proper support and structure, they can do very, very well. So I tend to look at, as a medical doctor, I tend to often look at things in medical analogies, but I wouldn't not allow not treat a child with asthma and say, well, you just shouldn't play sports. That child can have a perfectly appropriate play or career in sports if their asthma is treated appropriately. So we should be not looking at children with special needs differently. Rather, we should see them as full of potential, just needing the appropriate structure to meet that potential.
Well, it's interesting you say that because you know, I'm a professional counselor, and I've heard and some parents talk about when their children graduate high school at 18, they have learning disabilities, and what happens, instead of going to college or going to work, they're not living up to their potential. So I've seen a few very frustrated parents.
Right. We know that addressing the problem more upstream, as early as two and a half, early diagnosis, and appropriate intervention can lead to perfectly normal and fulfilling lives for children. And what more do we want for a society or parents than our children to graduate school, have a family, get a job, and be productive?
But it all rests on getting an appropriate education. And unfortunately, children with special needs are denied that routinely.
Sorry to hear that. Wow. Okay, so Doris, what's the next question? You're number 3.
Can you give some examples of what you mean by non-compliance and the consequences to students?
Sure. There are obviously special education regulations which are to be complied with by schools. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has documented an average of 1,000 violations of special education law every year for the past 5 school years. It's quite a remarkable number. And these are not just pesky little paperwork violations. These are substantive violations that are preventing students from learning. And we can see that in the MCAS numbers. MCAS is always a hot button issue, but at least it gives us a way to talk about student achievement in a language that everybody understands. It's a standardized language. So it happens that roughly 5 to 10% of students in Massachusetts enrolled in special education programs have the kind of cognitive impairments that might possibly prevent them from achieving academically. The rest, 90 to 95%, and this is data that comes right from the Department of Education's website, 90 to 95% of our students in special education do not have cognitive impairment. They learn differently. They are as capable as their non-disabled peers of learning.
Right.
They just learn differently. And given that fact, one would expect that the MCAS performance of both groups would be substantially similar. If 100% of non-disabled students perform at a certain level, you know, in 90% of their disabled peers are at the same intellectual level, there should be a correlation there. And there's very wide achievement gap. I think it's now roughly, I think it's 47 percentage points for mathematics and something like 42 percentage points for English. So interestingly, as the MCAS has gone along year by year, the gap between students with and without disabilities has actually widened.
I've heard that, yes.
Yeah, every year. And in fact, it's the only subgroup that's tracked. We talk about low-income English language learners, Asians, blacks, all these different subgroups of students that we track. All of their achievement gaps are narrowing. The only group that isn't is students with disabilities, and our kids are doing worse over time. So another thing you can look at is something like the Adams Scholarship. We have in this state something called the Adams Scholarship, where if you score at a certain level on MCAS and a certain level within your graduating class, the top 25th percentile or something, you can receive tuition-free education at any Massachusetts college or university for 4 years.
I heard about that. It's state, correct?
Yeah, state, Massachusetts, yeah.
I didn't know that.
So it's tuition free for any state college or university. Now again, the percentage of students with disabilities in the overall population is 17%. So of all the kids that are out there in pre-K through 12, 17% of those kids receive special education. So again, given that nearly all of them are as capable as their non-disabled peer, one would expect roughly 17% of the folks who win the Adams Scholarship ought to be kids with disabilities. Only about 1.5.
Oh.
And the reason so this is something that they miss out on through no fault of their own. The reason they don't have an equal chance to get that scholarship is because they're not taught in a way that they can learn. And they're not taught in a way that they can learn because their special education rights are violated.
Do you have any comments?
No, I think Ellen really hits the nail on the head. And it needs to start early. Because if you begin to address a problem in the 16th or 17th year, those children are unfortunately on their way out of the system. It needs to begin at the beginning and be consistent and year-round and follow solid evidence-based principles. We have a good amount of data in the medical and education literature for good therapies, for specific disabilities, autism, etc., that work. Not only do they work, they've been shown to be better than usual school district care when compared to usual educational practices in a local school district. Intensive treatment for autism has been shown to improve the cognitive abilities, make improved educational and communication gains, and really rehabilitate and reach the potential of these young children, particularly in critical developmental windows between 2 and, say, 6 years of age, when there's quite a bit of brain growth going on.
Well, yeah, I know we have a few good places in this area, New England for Children. I know we have that. And I've been to the Barrett Family Center here in Westboro. They do really, I'm not advertising for them, I just know they're out there and people respect them.
Yes. Yeah.
I do agree that kind of service would help those children. Just a little bit on that question in terms of kids not graduating or not being up to their potential. I don't know if this is okay to ask, maybe this is for a whole nother show. I know a lot of kids go to the community college. Have you had any feedback from parents on that? Are they going to college just to make them feel good, or are they going because they really, really believe that they'll graduate with a certificate or something like that? I don't know much about it, and I've heard mixed things.
Yeah, we really haven't looked into that because we're so focused on pre-K through grade 12, which is a huge undertaking all by itself.
Yes,
there are like 394 school districts in Massachusetts, and we're trying to keep up with each and every one of them. So we really haven't looked at the population that moves into college. Although anecdotally, I can tell you over the years, and I've been doing advocacy since 1997, I certainly have met many, many students who have jumped into college only to fail.
Yeah, I've seen that.
because they're not prepared. They were given a high school diploma, but they weren't taught how to manage themselves in a college environment, and so they fail. I do know a lot who are just sitting at home, who are very capable, students who are, in fact, very bright, sitting at home because they just weren't given the kind of support and help they needed to sort of develop their ability to integrate into the world.
I think you bring up an important parental aspiration, whether it be for a middle schooler, a high schooler, or pre-K. Is my child going to do well in life? Are they going to go to college? And the single best predictor over 40 years of educational research of how well a child does is their parental involvement. And that's why we're an organization of parents. We want our children to do well. Our voice is not being heard, it's being denied. And not only do Ellen and I want our particular children to do well, we want all children to do well.
Of course.
Whether it be developing normally or disabled children who are full of the same potential if supported appropriately.
I'm sure you can speak as a great grandparent.
Now, what if, as a child, you're told you can't do this, you can't do that, you'll never make anything of yourself? Does this go on as you get older?
I think yes, they can be self-fulfilling prophecies. I think that's a good question for your particular area of expertise.
Yes. I've seen that.
Yeah,
They've been told
certainly.
over and over again, and then they divert. Yeah.
And that goes on in public schools, unfortunately, today. I'm sure it's happening somewhere right now.
How much better could we do if we flipped the coin and said, you can do well, you will do well, and we'll help you?
Right.
That would be a great...
Unfortunately, that's not the way our public schools work. I mean, I can tell you, we all have a story. I have a story. My daughter was going to be tracked into a classroom with cognitively impaired students. She's not cognitively impaired. She's perfectly average intellectual ability. But she's hard to teach, and so her public school made the decision that rather than do the extra work, and yes, the extra expense, to teach her in a way that she could learn, they would just lower the bar and put her in a classroom with very low functioning students and leave her there. And that's where she'd be today if I hadn't had the ability to stand up and say, no, that's not right.
Wow.
And I'm sure there are many children in those classes right now who shouldn't be.
Well, that leads a good segue to talk about the Worcester and Shrewsbury school system. How are they doing?
Sure. Well, they're doing about as well as anybody else, which is horrible. Another thing about SPEDWatch is we're very much to the point.
I can see that.
We don't sugarcoat anything, because this is a horrible, horrible situation. People will often say to us, why do you have to be so negative? I heard that so many times, especially early on in SPEDWatch's history. Why do I have to be so negative? Because this is negative. I don't know how to talk about this in positive terms. This is bad stuff. Worcester and Shrewsbury. The last time Worcester and Shrewsbury received a regulatory compliance audit, which the Department of Education does periodically, was back in 2009. They're due for regulatory audit again this year. I don't know if they've yet been out this school year, but they're due this year. Looking at Shrewsbury, and I just picked out one area of noncompliance that is one that is very, very common across the state. That surprises a lot of people, because it's something that we felt as a society we certainly had done away with long ago, and that has to do with segregation of children with disabilities in our public schools. That happens regularly still in our public schools, and Shrewsbury and Worcester are certainly practicing segregation. I'm just looking at, this is the 2009 report. Maybe they've corrected this at this point, I don't know. But the point is, in 2009, this was happening to children. Shrewsbury, the Spring Street Elementary School, they had their special ed classroom down the end of a hall away from all the other classrooms. They were giving occupational therapy and physical therapy on the stage of the auditorium.
Oh.
The Floral Elementary School, They had a third grade resource room that's located at the back of the media center, and their OT and PT is conducted under the stairwell and in the hall. The Oak Middle School, they have a life skills class, and that one is not near any other classrooms. That's segregated within the building. Shrewsbury High School, occupational and physical therapy, again, was being conducted in a storage room that was crowded with stored equipment.
Now, if you went into your local school district and you saw your granddaughter being taught in her kindergarten class in a storeroom or underneath the stairs, what would
I
you say?
would go up and I would raise holy blue hell.
Good for you.
I
I
would
agree.
too.
I agree, and I don't think any child,
No?
disabled or non-disabled, should be taught out in the hallway on a stage or anything less than a standard equipped classroom. And if they need a little bit more because they're visually challenged or hearing challenged or whatever their issue is, they have a right to an appropriate public education. And they have since the mid-1970s, when the Congress saw fit to change the situation in the country then. But yet now it's 2009, and this is not SPEDWatch's data.
No.
This is the data from the Massachusetts Department of Education.
Interesting.
So, and Worcester is in the same boat. Worcester East Middle School, they have a whole wing of special education classrooms that's isolated from the rest of the school. Norback Elementary, same thing. Burncoat Middle School, same thing. Quinsigamond Elementary School, same thing. And then they have a number of instances where they have, there's a regulation that says you can only have an age span of 4 years between a youngest and oldest child in a given special education classroom, which is too wide to begin with, but that's the regulation. And Worcester has violated that regulation many times over. In terms of how are students with disabilities in Worcester and Shrewsbury doing, they're doing horribly. Just as they are everywhere else in the state. Again, this is Department of Education data. The 2011 MCAS, which is the most recent MCAS results we have. In Worcester, only 14% of students with disabilities were proficient in English, as opposed to 50% of the general population.
Wow.
In math, only 9% of students with disabilities were proficient in math, as opposed to 40% of their non-disabled peers. Same thing in Shrewsbury. Same kind of gaps, 30, 40 percentage points. So they're in Shrewsbury and in Worcester, students are having their special education rights violated, and they are failing as a result.
Interesting. Wow. So, thank you for sharing that.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's negative.
Moving on. What do you think? What's the next one? Wow.
I don't know. Which one is that?
Number 5.
Oh, jeez.
We're in a different segue now.
What have you been doing since you were last here in 2011?
Yeah, so you folks had me up here in January of
Right,
2011.
yeah,
It
that's
seems longer ago, but it wasn't. We have, well, what we've been doing is continuing really our mission of trying to recruit new members, you know, getting more and more parents involved in the movement, doing things to continue to solidify our presence as a mainstream player in the disability advocacy community. We had a really nice recognition of that in the Mental Health Legal Advisory Committee, which is a committee that advises the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court when they have cases before them that might involve mental health. They put out a publication, and in it, SPEDWatch was referenced heavily as one source of accurate information to go to. So that was really nice to see.
That was wonderful.
You know, we're continuing to raise awareness in the mainstream press. Every time there is a article in the paper about special education that we get wind of, You know how you can comment to these articles now online? We will comment to those, because very often you'll see the article, it goes the same way every time. The article's about special education, and the first couple of comments are about why are we throwing good money after bad? These kids aren't going to amount to anything anyway. Special education is bankrupting school districts, blah, blah, blah. And that's all that the general public ever hears, because nobody is speaking the other half of the story. That's what SPEDWatch does. We get our members together and we put counter comments in. And we've had instances where we've actually changed the mind of a reader who started commenting in the negative, and by the time we were done with the discussion, they were thanking us for, telling them, teaching them about all these other things, and really we're looking at the issue a whole different way. So we do a lot of that. Continuing to put pressure on individual school districts wherever the opportunity presents itself. It's just a matter of making sure that they, that districts know we are out there and we are watching. We had in Shrewsbury, for instance, here's another one locally in Shrewsbury. This was a couple years ago. The head of the early childhood education area was telling parents of preschoolers who had disabilities that their preschooler could not be provided with transportation to their special ed program unless they had a physical disability, which is illegal to say that. And we found out about it because the local early intervention folks called us. See, we're starting to really be the go-to for straight answers. Straight answers to hard questions. Is this okay? And we said, no, it's not okay. And we contacted Shrewsbury and, demanded to see the criteria they were using. They sent it to us, pointed out to them that this was against the law, what they were doing. They had to change it or we'd be filing with the state. Now, preschoolers in Shrewsbury should be getting transportation. Doing a lot of that. And then, obviously, our listserv. Continuing to work on our listserv, which is really sort of the heart, I think, of our community. People are, as Craig said, people are providing all kinds of emotional and advocacy support on this listserv. And I know for a fact that there are a lot of friendships that have developed off the listserv, people getting together off the listserv, helping each other with their team meetings, that type of thing. And then, of course, at the end of last year, I stepped down as the director and president of the organization. I had been doing it, I started the organization, I'd been running it for 5 years, and it was time to take that next step. So that was a big change too.
Well, we only have about 2 minutes. So how about if you just discuss what your upcoming event is and how people can contact you?
Okay, do you want to talk about the walk?
June 23rd, roughly about 8 weeks from now, we're having a walk at Lake Quannapowitt in Wakefield, and people may make pledges. It's a fundraising walk to ensure the financial security of SPEDWatch and our continued mission to help disabled children get an appropriate education in this state. And down the line, we'd like to bring our large membership's voices to our legislature, because we're simply taking the data already at the Department of Education, but slicing it and dicing it in a way to highlight where disabled children are not given a chance to achieve their potential, and it's clear in the data, but the legislators don't see it presented to them in that way. They don't have the data presented in the way that they need to make the important decisions for our children.
Wow. Well, with about 30 seconds left, how can people contact you?
Well, you can give us a call. It's 508-433-0995. You can email us at info@spedwatch.org. Check us out on the web. It's spedwatch.org, www.spedwatch.org.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Craig Vinch, current president of SPEDWatch, and Ellen Chambers, past president and founder.
Thank you.
And Doris, for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Glad
and
to
good
be
night. We said a lot.
You know, one thing that